I'm Sam Blythe, chair of the Bhutan Canada Foundation, and I have the honor to introduce Professor Jeffrey Sachs to you. Before I do that, I just wanted all of us to give a really heartfelt thanks to Jim Tracy and Cushing for hosting the event this weekend. I'd also like, on behalf of the Bhutan Canada Foundation, to thank Jim and Cushing, the trustees, the students, the faculty who are all here, and let them know that what they've done here this weekend will have a lasting effect on education in Bhutan. A lot of very good things come out of events like this, and I certainly feel that that is happening for this weekend.
Thank you, and BCF, Sam.
Oh, my pleasure. For most of you, I don't need to tell you much about Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey was born in Detroit in 1954. He's my age exactly. And was educated at Harvard. By 28, he was a tenured professor in the economics faculty at Harvard. He now is the director. He founded and now directs the Earth Instute and is a professor at Columbia University. Notably for us, as well as all of this, Jeffrey knows Bhutan well. He's been twice to the country in the last 2 years. In 2011, to co-chair the G&H conference with the Prime Minister. He most recently co-chaired the Bhutan Day of the United Nations in the day prior at Columbia University. Jeffrey knows a great deal about what we've been talking about this weekend. He is, I think, the best qualified person to talk to us and to be our final keynote speaker. And it's my honor to introduce him. Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank also the Canada-Bhutan Foundation and Cushing Academy. And I see friends from Bhutan there as well, which I'm very grateful. How are you? It's wonderful to be together, even though we're at a little bit of a distance by video. These days, this is a nice way when it's not possible to be together in person. I know you've been discussing the issue of education for sustainable happiness, and that's a great theme and a very important one for our times, when obviously we have too little happiness and too little sustainability of the prosperity that we do have. And I think that's why all of us have been inspired by Bhutan and Bhutan's search for a new economic model, and I would say a new societal model, built around the Fourth King's notion of gross national happiness. This is an idea that initially raised smiles and curiosity when it was first heard in the United States and Canada and elsewhere. But now it's raising a lot more than smiles and curiosity. It's attracting a huge interest because all over the world, people of all walks of life, including specialists in economics, specialists in psychology, and specialists in politics, know that our pursuit of traditional measures of well-being around the gross national product have really reached a dangerous point. It's long been understood at a technical level among economists that gross national product is definitely not a measure of well-being, though it can sometimes correlate with real well-being. But at this point in Earth's history and human society, the gaps between gross national product and what we really mean by human well-being are so serious that we have to take a new direction. And Bhutan has been forging that new direction for many years, experimenting with ways to turn the concept of gross national happiness into a real programmatic approach to government policy and to societal interactions. And when we had the wonderful conference in Bhutan last year on these issues, I think all of the people coming from outside were amazed and inspired by the amount of progress that Bhutan has been making. When Prime Minister Jigme Kinley spoke at the United Nations in September 2010, he also made this point to his fellow world leaders. And I'll never forget that occasion, in fact, because the UN General Assembly is, of course, a very impressive event. There are dozens of heads of state and prime ministers in the room. It's also a little bit odd, usually, because the way that the General Assembly hall works is that the speaker doesn't project the speaker's voice. It's not amplified, because there are 12 languages being listened to. So everybody is sitting in a very quiet hall with just an earpiece on, listening through their chosen language. And the hall is usually eerily quiet. So heads of state come, they make speeches, there are very light applause at the beginning and at the end. And it's a parade of heads of state, very fascinating, but a little bit odd in this quiet room, going on for a couple of days. Well, when Prime Minister Kinley spoke, in the middle of his speech, he proposed that happiness should be adopted as a global goal, and specifically that happiness should be adopted as the 9th Millennium Development Goal. I can tell you it was the only time in the entire day that there was spontaneous applause throughout the room, because the heads of state loved the idea, and they were gripped by the notion that we could actually pursue happiness rather than peacekeeping or stabilization policy or whatever it is that are the heavy topics of the day. The simplicity, directness, and appeal of putting happiness more centrally in our thinking and in our economic strategies was very resonant. And indeed, Bhutan thereafter sponsored a resolution in the General Assembly in which dozens of countries joined Bhutan in calling on the world community to explore the ways that we could have better measurements of well-being, including measurements of happiness, or what psychologists sometimes call subjective well-being, asking people, how do you feel about your life, and to what uses those better measurements could be put. We had a conference a year ago, or several months ago, I should say, in which hundreds of participants from around the world came and explored this question. And I was very honored to help co-author a report which is online and available for you to look at. It's called the World Happiness Report. It's the first ever World Happiness Report, inspired entirely by Bhutan, where we collected the evidence and the data on the reported, self-reported levels of well-being of people around the world, and in several chapters explored the kinds of lessons that one can learn from that. There are many fascinating and important things, of course, that we can learn from this, which the report emphasizes and which follows on the very points and ideas that Bhutan has been championing. I think that there are three major aspects of our economic life that are simply not captured or even disguised by our traditional measurements of gross national product. The first is a basic idea, long understood, in a way very deeply explored by the Buddha in his teachings, by Aristotle in the Western tradition, and of course by philosophers for centuries. And that is the idea that material well-being for poor people can be extraordinarily important for well-being, but after a certain level of income and consumption is reached, we would expect that further increases of income levels might not add very much to the sense of well-being, and indeed, in many cases, could actually decrease well-being by creating addictions to consumption and addictions to certain kinds of behaviors, and that we should expect that economic improvement is very, very important for poor people when poverty really means a risk of death or disease, but that as economies progress and certainly reach the very high levels of income of Canada and the United States, increments to the GNP probably have little systematic benefit for the well-being of the society. And economists give this a term called the declining marginal utility of income, by which they mean that gains of income have a big effect for poor people, but a very small and diminishing effect for increasingly affluent people, and after a certain point, maybe no benefit at all. In the United States, a wonderful scholar at University of Pennsylvania named Richard Easterlin noticed already 20 years ago that as the U.S. Gross national product per person was rising decade by decade, the self-reported level of well-being on average in American society wasn't increasing at all. And now, since 1960, the U.S. has had a tripling of income per person and no budge at all of the reported well-being or life satisfaction of the people. This has become known as the Easterlin paradox. So this is the first of the three ways in which GNP can be very misleading. We find in our report, not surprisingly, that higher GNP per capita, that is gross national product per person, does raise happiness significantly in poor countries. But that once a country has reached a high level of prosperity, any further gains of average well-being that come through conventionally measured economic growth are very small or perhaps not even existent. Now, the second area, of course, where GNP goes badly wrong, we know, is that GNP is the measure of our market activity, but it does not measure the quality of our communities. It does not measure the quality of our values. It does not measure the extent of social trust. It does not measure the quality of governance or the relation of the governors and those who are governed. And so the whole dimension of social inclusion, social trust, cultural preservation, and so on is ignored. This social dimension is under threat in many, many countries, of course, including our own in the United States. We've seen a discernible decline of social trust on simple report of asking people over the years, can you trust most people in the community? Can you trust most people in society? Those who have answered in the affirmative are a declining proportion over time. There is every indication of a rising level of mistrust, of course, of deep unhappiness about failures of government. Of course, a constant worry of the kinds of disasters that we've experienced in Aurora, Colorado, and the Sikh temple in recent weeks. And this is also a dimension of life that requires our highest attention. What's happening in our communities? What's happening to our young people? What's happening to mental health? What's happening to the access of people to mental health services? Why is trust going down? How does that relate to economic inequality or high unemployment or other kinds of stress in our society? Well, this is a whole dimension of life, crucial, that doesn't even begin to be explored by traditional economic measurements. There's a third dimension as well that is very much on our minds these days, and that is the environmental dimension. We know that the sustainability of the natural environment is not only not captured by the gross national product, it sometimes runs directly contrary to gains of gross national product. It's not inevitable that higher income destroys the environment, but simply using our current technologies more intensively pose great threat to the physical earth and to even our sustenance and survival of many in the coming years. In the United States, I'm sure you're aware, because all it took was to go outside the house to feel it. The month of July was the single hottest month in U.S. recorded history. It broke all records. And the last 12 months are the single hottest 12-month period in all of U.S. history. And of course, the drought that has now afflicted more than half the counties of the United States is the most severe drought in many decades. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture on Friday just downgraded very sharply the projected yields of soybeans and maize because of this very severe drought. Very sad to say, Bhutan, even in its magnificent location in the high Himalayas, is also extremely vulnerable to this global trend, even though Bhutan has done absolutely zero to contribute to these dangers. It is, like all countries, a recipient of the damages. In the case of Bhutan, probably the most dramatic single effect is the retreat of the glaciers throughout the country. We have a team of scientists that have been working with Bhutan's climatologists and glaciologists to study the history of the glaciers. They use every ingenious technique to get hundreds of years of history of the extent of the glaciers, expanding and contracting according to climate and weather cycles. And I had a chance to talk to my colleagues about 10 days ago. They are absolutely alarmed by what they're seeing, because there's a very significant retreat of Bhutan's glaciers. This is having many severe risks for communities with the Glacier Lake outburst floods, the so-called bluffs, that can devastate valley communities. It also threatens Bhutan's long-term economic sustenance, because as I'm sure you know, Bhutan's main export is hydroelectric power, and that depends on the glaciers for an annual river flow. And this is under very serious threat right now. Well, if I put all these pieces together, I think it's fair to say that traditional ideas about the economy and traditional measures of the economy, particularly gross domestic product, gross national product, miss these three major dimensions of our present-day reality. They miss the fact of the declining marginal utility of private consumption. And indeed, for many people, sad to say, the fact that consumption has become a negative rather than a positive because of the massive addictions, too much television watching, too much gambling, too much eating of fast foods that are created in ways to build our addictions, and on and on. The advertisers, the marketers, the relentless persuaders have really figured out how to hit our hot buttons. So it's not just that we are satiated, it's that we are assaulted by a massive assault of media propaganda and advertising, trying to stimulate us to consume more, even though it's not solving any of our deeper problems. Second, the crisis of social trust and its decline. And third, the absolutely existential crisis of the physical environment. An environmental crisis so severe that the scientists have given it a new name, which you'll hear a lot about in future years, and that is the Anthropocene. The idea that we've entered a new era of the planet Earth, where the dangers of global warming, ocean acidification, depletion of groundwater, loss of habitat as forests are cleared, high burdens of nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from heavy fertilizer use, and so on, are having such a massive effect that they are calling into question our ability to feed ourselves, our ability to sustain ourselves, our ability to keep out of the way of horrible disasters, extreme heat waves, floods, droughts, storms, rising sea levels, and the like. So all of this, the economic, the social, and the environmental, are in a combined, interconnected crisis at a time when we have so much wealth and so much technology. We have not mastered our ability to control ourselves well enough to use this knowledge and this technological power for our own sustainability. As you are aware, last month there was a conference in Rio de Janeiro that really took on these issues. I would say in a very very thoughtful way. Unfortunately, President Obama did not go. Many world leaders did not attend, though about 100 heads of state did end up attending. So this Rio summit was a summit dedicated to the concept of sustainable development. And sustainable development is precisely the idea that a healthy society needs to combine economic objectives, social inclusion, including social trust, and environmental sustainability. So the very idea of sustainable development is to combine the economic, the social, and environmental dimensions, and to help people understand and help governments to understand that human well-being depends on a balance and a recognition of all of these crucial dimensions of life, not only the economic dimension, and even less, not only the pursuit of higher market-based consumption per person. The Rio +20 summit that took place last month was an anniversary of the Rio summit of 1992. At that summit 20 years ago, 3 major treaties had been adopted, one on climate change, one to preserve biodiversity, and one to fight desertification, that is the encroachment of deserts into human habitats and farmlands. Unfortunately, when the world convened last month at the Rio +20 summit, the verdict was that none of those 3 treaties had really succeeded. The world had adopted international law to fight climate change. It had adopted international law to protect and preserve biodiversity. It had adopted international law to combat desertification. And yet none of those 3 treaties had succeeded. What had happened was that the lawyers and the diplomats, unfortunately, had taken over. And rather than fulfilling these treaties, they had become the object of tremendous bickering, legalistic thinking, zero-sum mentality that each country said the others should take the first steps. And for 20 years, very little has been accomplished. So right now, our most important task, as I see it, is to revive the spirit of sustainable development and to use the insights and inspiration of gross national happiness and the lessons of modern psychology and studies of human well-being to help us to do that. And so these strands of Bhutan's initiatives around GNH and the UN initiative for sustainable development are really 2 strands of one interconnected human priority. And that is the reorientation of our economic life and our social life and our environmental responsibility to a more balanced and urgently more balanced life around the world. Now, at the Rio Plus 20 summit last month, actually at the end of June, the government said that we need new measurements. We need new ways to identify goals, and indeed that we should adopt what are at least provisionally being called Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, to help guide the world towards this more balanced strategy. And Prime Minister Tinley has set his own commission to help advise the world on how we can adopt this more balanced approach. On my part, I've been tasked by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon with helping to create a new network of expertise around sustainable development. This was announced just a couple of days ago by the Secretary General. It will be called the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN in abbreviation. And I'm very lucky to have a chance to help create it and direct it. The idea is to create partnerships of universities, schools, foundations around the world to promote evidence and science-based pathways to sustainable development. Of course, I would include value-based pathways as well. But part of the purpose of the network is to bring scientists such as ecologists, engineers, climatologists, public health specialists together to make recommendations on how we can reorient our economies to achieve the triple bottom line of economic, social, and environmental objectives. So I very much hope that I will be working with the Bhutan Canada Foundation, with Cushing Academy, with the Royal University of Bhutan, and with other partners to help forge this network. I spoke to Prime Minister Tinley a few days ago about it, and he so kindly, as always, pledged his participation and support. And of course, I said that the network would do everything it can to support Bhutan in Bhutan's leadership on these issues. So we have an opportunity, but more than an opportunity, we have an urgent need to take these themes of a more approach to our economic life, of the triple bottom line of economy, society, and environment, of the notion that we should be pursuing our well-being rather than our market consumption. We have the need to turn this in a practical direction in the coming years. This will not be easy. Our politicians are relentlessly ignoring these issues, certainly not in Bhutan, but in the United States and Canada, alas. We don't have governments where they need to be providing leadership. So this is going to have to be leadership from civil society, leadership from you, ladies and gentlemen, from our schools and our universities. And I view this new Sustainable Development Solutions Network as at least one modest part of a contribution to that new global reality. Everywhere I go in the world, people know something is really wrong with the direction that we're heading. We're not fighting against a blindness, we're fighting against inertia of our political systems. We're fighting against very powerful vested interests of major companies that make a lot of money being the polluters. We're fighting against politicians who are committed to very short-run agendas rather than the perspective of generations, which we absolutely need, especially at this time on the planet. So there are real obstacles, to be sure, but around the world, the public wants a more serious approach to life, wants an approach that takes on the challenges that they can feel every day of a changing weather system, of more droughts, more floods, more heat waves, more danger for themselves and their children. And that is the recognition that we need to build. I do believe we can forge a global framework. I believe that we can help the world to adopt shared sustainable development goals. And I believe that through our new powers of networking, such as what we're doing this moment, where we can easily have a discussion, even separated by hundreds of miles, we have a chance to build solutions in ways that we did not before. So that is, I believe, our agenda in the years ahead. It will certainly be my agenda. I will share with the conference organizers the announcement of this new network so that I hope you will get involved in this. And I look forward to continuing work together with all of you in the years ahead. I think we have a great opportunity, but we also have an enormous task ahead. Thanks very much for letting me share these thoughts with you today.
Jeffrey has kindly agreed to take some questions. If you would come up to the microphone and ask questions here, thank you very much for that.
And don't be shy, because as a professor, I can always call on you also.
Please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sachs. Thank you very much for your time. I am a music teacher at Cushing Academy. And as I was listening to your remarks, it struck me that these issues are so huge. And especially in a small institution, one can feel slightly overwhelmed and not be sure where to start. And I wonder if your upcoming efforts might involve a way to break apart the problems and issues into smaller pieces that individual institutions could study, attack, make recommendations on in somewhat of a collaborative fashion so that we could organize our energies. Are there any thoughts in this direction? I'm curious.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks a lot. Let me share with you just a couple of minutes of my experience around the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs. Some of you may have heard of them. They played an important role in the fight against poverty during the last dozen years. In September 2000, the world leaders came together at the start of the new millennium and adopted a series of goals to fight poverty, hunger, and disease. Now, those 8 goals, the Millennium Development Goals, have not succeeded in every way, but they have succeeded in raising awareness, attention, and government policy making in the poor countries. Turns out, incidentally, in surveys, Americans know the least about them of just about any country because we hardly discuss them inside the U.S., but in a typical low-income country, the Millennium Development Goals are very much discussed and are very much part of public policy making. A year after the goals were adopted, then Secretary General Kofi Annan asked me to help lead an effort to identify ways to achieve these goals. The goals include challenges such as reducing child mortality, reducing the deaths of mothers in childbirth, fighting AIDS, TB, and malaria, and so on. And so I had an opportunity to pull together global networks of experts in these particular areas. They gave advice and recommendations, and those recommendations in turn led to many national efforts to identify what should be done in Ghana, or in Mozambique, or in Bangladesh, or other countries around these goals. And I found that the idea of having these goals was very powerful because in these countries, the goals were taught to school children, they were taught to cabinet ministers, they became part of the public discourse. I think there's an analogy to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Here's my basic thought. It seems to me that the idea that a society should have a triple bottom line, not just an income bottom line, that a society needs to take care not only of how much is produced in the market, but the quality of its communities and the sustainability of the environment, is an idea that every child should learn, starting from first grade. It's of course, at one level, a very complicated set of issues. We have our PhD students trying to understand how you combine various objectives of economic development and low carbon energy systems, for example. So there's plenty of expert knowledge that's needed. But at the same time, I believe there's a revolution of shared knowledge that's also needed. I would like to see every student pushing academy be able to ask and answer the question, what is important in America and in the world in terms of how our economy is managed? Managed for fairness, managed for prosperity, managed for environmental sustainability. So I would like to see every student have the concepts of sustainable development at hand, to understand what they are, what they mean, and how it relates to their own country and their own community. A lot of the issues that will need to be solved in energy systems, transport systems, farming systems, water systems, and the like will have to be solved at a local level, not at a global level. So every city, municipality, province, country will have to take on this integrated set of challenges. And so in addition to students knowing about the need for a more balanced approach to economic life, I believe that students and schools can get involved in the sustainability of their own communities. If you ask the question, in Massachusetts, what will climate change mean? What are the risks that are going to be posed? What steps could Massachusetts, could the vicinity of Cushing Academy take to enhance sustainability? How could Cushing Academy's own campus become more sustainable, resilient, energy efficient, reliant on renewable energy, or whatever specific set of topics? These should be studied and learned in every school, because I think they open up the universe of problems to students who are going to be, and better be very soon, the leaders of these efforts in the next 20, 30, 40 years. One of the aspects of sustainable development is that there's no quick fix to the challenges of combining economy, society, and environment. And we right now have a world economic system that is very dangerous, actually, for the planet. But moving to a safe system is going to require some decades. It's not going to happen from one year to the next. That means that training your students isn't a waste of time. It's not as if the problem's going to be gone by the time they become the leaders. Training our students, our young people, is absolutely the most important single investment we can make. Because even if we, my generation, the baby boomer generation, had been more responsible or suddenly became responsible and started to take on these issues, it's going to be the Gen Xers and the Gen Ys and the millennials and all the rest who are going to absolutely have to carry the story through to success. And so training education around these issues is vital. It should be active education. In other words, education not just out of a book, but in the community. Education that is reflexive with action, that is involving problem solving, that is brainstorming with the city government, brainstorming with the state government, brainstorming with the local utility company. What should be done? What can be done? What are our options? I think this is a very exciting way both to teach, to learn, and to help to create the next generation of leaders. And I know that Cushing, because you're so committed to building leadership, and you're so committed to 21st century leadership, there's a great curriculum to develop here. It is part of our goal of this network to help build that online curriculum so that schools around the world can use it and have the best of what different places have put together. But I think that this, in short, would be some of the suggestions I'd have.
Michael. Our Honorable Minister of Education, Michael.
Yes.
Good, for the professor. Always such an honor to listen to your power-packed talk. We are 3 years now to 2015. Would you like to tell us, Professor, as to where the world stands in relation to the Millennium Development Goals? And I very much look forward to meeting you soon in Bhutan next.
Thank you so much, and I do as well. We can't await our next visit, believe me. We have two big challenges between now and 2015. The first is to make as much progress to achieve the Millennium Development Goals in their entirety around the world as possible. And the second is to forge the agreements for the post-2015 period. As I mentioned, the Millennium Development Goals indeed were adopted for a 15-year interval, 2000 to 2015. And they set quantitative objectives that child mortality should be reduced by 2/3, that maternal mortality should be reduced by 3/4, that all children should be completing primary education, and so forth. And what we have worldwide is quite considerable progress, but for many, many countries, progress that is not sufficient to achieve all of the goals. Of course, Asia has been the region of the fastest progress. China has been the single country of the most impressive elimination of poverty in human history, with the poverty rate having declined from roughly half the population 30 years ago to something on the order of 10% or less of the population today. And this kind of rapid growth has been a tremendous benefit, but of course China's also massively polluted its environment along the way. So they did not do this through sustainable development. They did it through a breakneck economic development without paying adequate attention to the environment. So the story is a complicated one. In Africa, which is the poorest region of the world, progress has been positive but insufficient in general to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. In Asia, progress has been much greater. And in Latin America, happily, progress has also been quite high. One of the reasons I could not be with you today is that I just arrived back from the country, Colombia, this morning. I was meeting with the government in the last couple of days, and they were reporting a very, very significant decline of poverty rates just during the past decade. Very positive news. So in the last 3 years, we're working extremely hard to accelerate the progress in Africa. I'm personally working with many governments, Nigeria, Senegal, Mali, Mozambique, Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, and others to try to increase the pace. Frankly speaking, of course, the global economic crisis was a serious setback because it took the attention of the rich world completely off these goals and put the attention squarely into internal problems. Also, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were quite disastrous as well, because so much American energy and effort went into war rather than into development. It's really a terrible shame for our country, a real loss of opportunity. But even with these massive diversions of financial crisis and war, the Millennium Development Goals have spurred a lot of progress, and that progress is continuing, and we need to build on it. One of the happy aspects for me is that at this point, there is a big worldwide appreciation of the Millennium Development Goals. And so the interest of the world community in having a new set of goals for the post-2015 period seems to be quite high. And that gives me some optimism that we will achieve the second half, and that is setting a new framework to commence when the Millennium Development Goal period itself ends. The Secretary General has taken 3 main steps. Actually, there are four steps I could mention to move to the post-2015 period very briefly. One is that he's established a high-level panel to report on what the new goals should be. And that panel will be co-chaired by Prime Minister David Cameron of the UK, President Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, and President Yudhoyono of Indonesia. So that's path number 1. Second, at Rio +20, an intergovernmental process was declared that will parallel the work of the Commission. Then a third path is through the UN agencies, where the Secretary General has instructed 50 UN agencies to work together to promote the post-2015 period. And the fourth of these channels is the one that I mentioned earlier, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which will work on the practical problem solve to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals when they are adopted. So it's a very rich agenda, and I think a very heartening one. My disheartened part is my own country, is the United States, is the distraction of our government, is the lack of interest in Washington to almost any of these issues. We're going through a very difficult period in this country when our political system is not representing the needs or the aspirations of the common person. Rather, it's a system that's become, in my opinion, it's very corrupted, very money-driven, very focused on cutting taxes for rich people, but not providing services and environmental protection for the society at large. And this, I think, is the biggest downside. But everywhere where I go in the world, there is more interest and hope, and I remain, of course, an optimist.
Hi, Professor Sachs. My name is Cool. I do a lot of different things. My main thing is I run global for Wikipedia, but I also work on different education projects. And I actually think like climate change is the biggest problem we have, even though I focus on education. So in my free time, actually, like a bunch of friends and I will like create different applications. Like we actually try to do something where people try to reduce their carbon footprint and kind of get rewards. And we're actually speaking at this event next week, Campus Party, where like 10,000 kids across Europe, you know, they get together and they're all really pretty much geeks, and they try to like solve different problems. And the Millennium Goals is like one of the things that's on the list, right? We've tried a lot of different things, but it all seems still really nebulous. Like we're trying to still figure out what are the concrete solutions where you can get people involved. And you talk about, well, there's education, and you know we have to kind of get people more interested in like learning about these problems, but it doesn't seem to affect a lot of these people unless there's direct action. Like what can they do immediately? And even though we've kind of listed all these things they can do to like reduce their carbon footprint, it's not that actionable. And you know we're trying to come up with different ideas. Like I might like host like the tech festival next year in Silicon Valley. It's going to be another 10,000 kids, and they're all trying to figure out like how do we solve different world problems. And like I'm trying to figure out who do we meet with, who do we kind of like get together so we can kind of figure out what are the best ways to do stuff that's really tangible, and then like people can see results right away. I mean, we've had different ideas where we like, you know, kind of like the geek way of approaching problems, where we like list up everything like a big bug list, right? And these are all the problems, and we start assigning people and we'll start tackling them. Like, let's create an application for this, or let's do something here. But we're trying to figure out like, what's the best way to get the right people together to kind of brainstorm these issues and start solving these problems? Because we have a lot of people that are interested, but we just don't know the right way of doing it.
Well, look, it's fantastic, and I think that there are many specific areas of engagement. In the Millennium Development Goal area, since those goals are related to disease control, food production, local infrastructure, and so on, there are lots of fascinating, very geeky problems, by the way, of how to use mobile technologies for community health workers, for agricultural extension, for getting kids in school, how, of course, to use the cloud for education in very low-income settings if you can get adequate bandwidth and so forth. We have a whole engineering team at the Earth Instute that works around the clock, flat out, on all of those problems, and there are great ways to make those connections. When it comes to sustainable development, which is an integration of yet more issues, especially around environment and community as well as economy, we have also a long list of rather important and specific areas where work is needed on energy systems, transport design, urban settlements, and infrastructure, and so forth. And we're going to put together a number of working groups and task forces around this kind of focused and specific problem solving. And I'm sure that there will be ways to integrate the community, the very important communities you're talking about, into this process, and indeed help them lead the way on some of the programming solutions, apps, and so forth that will be needed. As a general matter,
when we get that together, like if there's a website or something we can go to, because we're all kind of just trying to figure out how do people get more coordinated on this.
right, so the first thing I would say is my email address is sachs@columbia.edu.
Should I post it so 10,000 kids can email you?
No problem. There is a new website that was launched yesterday. It has almost no content on it yet because the real launch is September 1 or September 3, actually, called UNSDSN, United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, .org. Okay? So if you write to me, or if you can remember the website, on the website there's a place to sign an email address and start getting information on how to get plugged into this network. But I'm in a pretty good position to brainstorm with you on how some of these communities can get engaged, because that's exactly what we're going to be trying to do.
Okay, because I know there's a lot of people that want to get involved, and it's very confusing. And even when I went to the UN like a couple months ago for the Social Innovation Summit, I still didn't get any answers there. So,
You know, this is a test for me. I said to Secretary General, we need an effective way to have a network of problem solving. And so he said, okay, you try. You know, and this is essentially the genesis of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. I need help, even on how to design our own web interfaces, how to build the right kinds of logs, checks, communications, and so forth. So this is something that you know, the community you're talking about could really participate in.
Right. Okay, that's good to know. So I'm going to look for that. I'll email you, and I'd like to see something a little more concrete we can kind of work with.
Let's do it.
Okay.
On behalf of all of us here, Bhutan Canada Foundation, Cushing Academy, all the delegates here, we'd like to thank you, Jeffrey, for doing this with us today. We've gotten a lot out of this, and there's a lot of very eager people ready to get on with the job here.
Sam, tell Jeff about, was it your son or daughter today?
I just walking in here this evening, about 5 minutes before you talk, I had a call from my daughter in Thimphu, who is doing research on the anthropology of the internet in Bhutan. And she said that she'd seen your researchers yesterday, and they were working hard. She wanted me to tell you that. She wanted me to tell you that, and send you her best wishes. So best wishes from us, and I know you've been traveling a lot, and we're very appreciative that you took the time to do this. Thank you.
Sam, thank you very much. And let's really pledge that we do follow up. My email address, that's the real one, sachs@columbia.edu. And, you know, it will quickly get onto a list to keep you posted on the Sustainable Development Network and on how we can brainstorm to, you know, to push this initiative forward. So I will be grateful to hear from you, and I guarantee you, you'll be hearing back from us.
We've got a lot to do in Canada, as you know, to make up for our government, and we apologize for that, and we will make an effort. Thank you. Thank you very much.